Just after midnight on December 2, 1984, a storage tank at the Union Carbide chemical plant in Bhopal began leaking a gas called methyl isocyanate (MIC). The plant in Madhya Pradesh, India, was equipped with 6 safety systems designed to detect such a leak, none of which were operational that night. 27 tons of MIC gas spread throughout the sleeping city. As an engineer was flushing water through a corroded pipe in the MIC production complex, a series of valves failed, allowing the water to flow freely into one of the 3-story tanks holding the toxic chemical in a liquid state. This caused a rapid and violent reaction. The tank shattered in its concrete casing and spewed a deadly cloud of MIC, hydrogen cyanide, monomethylamine, and other chemicals, all of which hugged the ground. As the toxic cloud blanketed much of Bhopal, people began to die. Aziza Sultan, a survivor, remembers, "At about 1:02 am, I woke to the sound of my baby coughing badly. In the half-light, I saw that the room was filled with a white cloud. I heard a lot of people shouting. They were shouting, 'Run! Run!'" she says. "Then I started coughing, with each breath seeming as if I was breathing in fire. My eyes were burning." Kampa Devi Shukla recalls, "It felt like somebody had filled our bodies up with red chilies. Our eyes had tears coming out, noses were watering, we had froth in our mouths. The coughing was so bad that people were writhing in pain. The crush of fleeing crowds wrenched children's hands from their parents' grasp. Families were literally ripped apart. Some people just got up and ran in whatever they were wearing, or even if they were wearing nothing at all. People were only concerned as to how they would save their lives, so they just ran." In those apocalyptic moments, no one knew what was happening. People started dying in the most hideous ways. Some vomited uncontrollably, went into convulsions, and dropped dead. Others choked, drowning in their own body fluids. Many people died in the stampedes through narrow alleyways where street lamps, swamped in gas, burned brown. The crush of fleeing crowds wrenched children's hands from their parents' grasp. Families were literally ripped apart. MIC, used in the production of pesticides, is highly corrosive if inhaled. 500,000 people were exposed, and at least 25,000 have died as a result. More than 150,000 people still suffer from disorders caused by the accident and the subsequent contamination, respiratory diseases, kidney and liver disorders, cancers, and gynecological issues. Union Carbide shut down the site and left it to rust. It has never been cleaned up, and so the poisoning continues. No one knows exactly how many thousands of people died. Union Carbide put the number at 3,800. Municipal workers who collected bodies, loading them onto lorries to be buried in mass graves or burned on funeral pyres, say they handled at least 15,000 corpses. Based on numbers of burial shrouds sold in the city, survivors make the conservative claim that about 8,000 people died in the first week alone. But the dying has never stopped. Rashida Bai, a survivor who has lost 5 members of her family to a variety of cancers over the past 3 decades, considers those who escaped with their lives the unlucky ones. She adds, "The lucky ones are those who died on that night." Union Carbide shut down the site and left it to rust. It has never been cleaned up, and so the poisoning continues. In 1999, testing of groundwater and well water near the site revealed mercury levels up to 6 meters times greater than what is accepted as safe by the US Environmental Protection Agency (EPA. Chemicals were found in the water that cause cancer, brain damage, and birth defects. Trichloroethene, a chemical shown to impair fetal development, was found at levels 50 times higher than EPA limits. Testing published in a 2002 report revealed poisons such as 1,3,5-T-rich-lorobenzene, dichloromethane, chloroform, lead, and mercury in women's breast milk. In 2001, the Michigan-based Dow Chemical Company bought Union Carbide, acquiring its assets and liabilities. Dow, however, has steadfastly refused to clean up the Bhopal site. Nor has it provided safe drinking water, compensated the victims, or shared with the Indian medical community any information it holds on the toxic effects of MIC, the data that Bhopal's doctors have requested and say they need. In order to deal with the lasting effects of the crisis, Dow has treated like a trade secret and held back. Union Carbide built the Bhopal factory in the 1970s, confident that India represented a huge untapped market for its pesticides. However, sales never met the company's expectations. Indian farmers, struggling to cope with droughts and floods, lacked the money to buy Union Carbide's products. For 15 years before the disaster, Union Carbide routinely dumped highly toxic chemical waste at sites inside and outside the factory. Thousands of tons of pesticides, solvents, chemical catalysts, and byproducts lay strewn across 6 hectares 16 acres inside the plant. Evaporation ponds covering 14 hectares outside the factory were filled with thousands of liters of liquid waste. The plant, which never reached its full production capacity, proved to be a loss-making venture and was shut down in the early 1980s. Though large quantities of dangerous chemicals were left abandoned on the site, 3 huge steel tanks continued to hold more than 60 tons of MIC. Although MIC is a particularly unstable gas, Union Carbide's elaborate safety systems were allowed to fall into disrepair and become ineffective. The factory manager's reasoning seemed to be that since production had stopped, no threat remained. As monsoons battered the decaying plant, rain caused the chemical waste evaporation ponds to overflow. Toxins penetrated the soil, leaching into underground channels. Contaminated water from wells was pumped into 42 neighborhoods. In secret tests carried out by Union Carbide in 1989, the results of which were subsequently seen by the Bhopal Medical Appeal, the company concluded that the site was lethally contaminated. Groundwater instantly killed fish. Many of the places where the samples were taken were just inside the factory wall. People drew their water from wells and standpipes on the other side of the wall. Despite having indisputable proof of the site's toxicity, Union Carbide chose not to notify local people that the water was unsafe. It attacked those in the community who voiced concern, dismissing them as troublemakers. The full extent of the contamination was not exposed until 1999, when Greenpeace investigators, after running a series of tests, reported that soil and water in and around the plant were contaminated by organochlorines and heavy metals, which are both highly toxic and accumulate in the body. More than 50,000 Bhopalis are unable to work because of their injuries. Many have no family left at all. A follow-up study in 2002, which found mercury, lead, and organochlorines in the breast milk of women living near the plant, also discovered that the children of gas-affected women suffered an array of debilitating illnesses, including birth defects and reproductive disorders. The polluter pays legal principle applies in India, but Union Carbide and its parent company, Dow, have refused to pay compensation for this second environmental catastrophe of contaminated water. In 1989, Union Carbide, in a partial out-of-court settlement with the Indian government, agreed to pay $470 million in compensation to the victims of the disaster. But the victims themselves were not consulted in the negotiations, and more than 9 in 10 received a maximum of $500 each, or enough to pay medical expenses for 5 years. Today, victims of the disaster eke out a perilous existence. More than 50,000 Bhopalis are unable to work because of their injuries. Many have no family left at all. In 1991, India's criminal justice system charged Warren Anderson, Union Carbide's chairman and chief executive at the time of the disaster, with culpable homicide not amounting to murder. If he had been convicted in India, he would have faced a maximum of 10 years in prison. Anderson never stood trial. An Indian extradition request languished in the US courts for 3.5 years without a response from officials. In September 2014, a few months before the 30th anniversary of the disaster, Anderson, the son of a Brooklyn carpenter, died aged 92 in a nursing home in Vero Beach, Florida. Union Carbide was charged with culpable homicide. The corporation, like its former chief executive, refused to face trial in India, and the charges have never been resolved. Dow and Union Carbide merged in 2001. The agreement submitted to regulators omitted any mention of pending criminal cases against Union Carbide. Dow has been served summons to appear in court at least 6 times in Bhopal to explain Union Carbide's continued absence. It has ignored all 6 notices. Union Carbide remains liable for the environmental devastation it caused. Environmental damages were not addressed in the 1989 settlement, and the contamination continues to spread. These liabilities became the responsibility of Dow. Some Dow shareholders tried to stop the merger, knowing that a corporation assumes the assets and the liabilities of a company it buys, according to established corporate law. Indeed, soon after it acquired Union Carbide, Dow settled a US lawsuit, paying out $2.2 billion to compensate people in the US affected by Union Carbide's use of asbestos in legacy products. But Dow maintains that it is not liable for Union Carbide's actions in Bhopal.